Howdy there, Isaac here. This is the fifth installment in the Izuku Uchiha series, one which I've grown very fond of. In the last part, we saw Izuku face off against both Todoroki and Bakugo in the school tournament, and actually win. The Uchiha's speed was too much to keep up with, and his genjutsu also aided in the win. That said, Izuku wasn't happy about winning. He recognized both of his opponents could have won if not for certain circumstances. The Uchiha needed more power, and that path to power led him to none other than the number 2 hero, Endeavor. What If Izuku Was a Uchiha Part 5. The story starts now. Some time had passed since Izuku was taken into Endeavor's agency, and it was hardly well spent. See, Endeavor had allowed Izuku to join, but only for Shoto's sake. The pro hero would have Izuku and Todoroki spar during the day, only stopping the sessions to give his son advice before resuming the fight. Then, by night, Izuku would go out patrolling with Endeavor's sidekick, Burnin, while Shoto and his father went out by themselves. This arrangement did annoy Izuku, but it also allowed him to copy moves from the many heroes in Endeavor's agency. The one person he really wanted to copy from, though, was Endeavor himself. Izuku knew the hero wasn't as strong as All Might, or as fast, but this man was someone who pushed himself to be far stronger than the average person, and all without a strength-enhancing quirk. Endeavor was the only person who could teach Izuku how to become strong enough to replace All Might. Izuku just needed to get the chance to spar with the hero. Just one chance. As the days went on, Shoto would get incrementally stronger and faster, being able to evade Izuku's attacks, and even being able to freeze the Uchiha a couple of times. The long sparring sessions had also put a strain on Izuku's eyes, forcing them to be active longer and longer each day. The two students hadn't talked much during their time at the agency. They were strictly there to get stronger, and Shoto was still a bit upset about what had happened during the tournament. He had lost his temper, and while he didn't blame Izuku for it, he just couldn't bring himself to apologize just yet. Izuku, on the other hand, simply didn't care about talking to his classmate. He was there to beat him, to show Endeavor who was really worth training. Izuku needed training from Endeavor. He needed to become strong enough to beat Todoroki and Bakugo all on his own, fair and square. And this would all come to fruition on the third day of training. Izuku had grown bored of fighting Todoroki over and over, and decided to stop playing nice. See, Izuku didn't want to hurt his opponent much since Endeavor was there, and was his father after all. But after being around Endeavor for a couple of days, Izuku had learned that Endeavor really didn't care if Shoto gets hurt, and almost encourages it. So, as soon as their first sparring match started, Izuku would speed blitz Todoroki, who would use his flames to try to stave off Deku. Normally this would work, but the Uchiha simply sidestepped the spiral of flames and would drive his fist into Shoto's stomach. Todoroki would fly back, his eyes wide with surprise as to how Izuku was still faster and stronger than him. Well, it's simple really. When you're around pro heroes, you tend to pick up a few things. While Burnin isn't as strong and fast as Endeavor, Izuku still copied her speed and quickly caught up to her skill level. Izuku is a prodigy, and with the Sharingan, his abilities have far surpassed his anime counterpart. The Uchiha quickly closes the distance between him and Todoroki, grabbing him by the shirt and quickly kneeing him in the stomach again. Izuku begins to use a combo attack on Shoto, uppercutting the student before getting low to the ground and kicking him up into the air. Once in the air, Izuku would grab Todoroki's leg and slam him onto the ground, ending the fight right then and there. "Come on, Shoto, get back up and fight. How could you let him beat you so easily?" Endeavor scoffed, though Shoto laid there without a single word. "He's knocked out. I made sure he would be," said Izuku, who looked at Endeavor with his scarlet eyes. He's knocked out? And here I thought he was making progress. Okay, your sparring session is over today. Go find Burnin. I'll tend to Shoto. Endeavor went to pick up his son, but would stop as he noticed the way Izuku was staring at him. This was a look similar to the one Shoto gave him, though it was also the same look Endeavor had himself. This kid, he purposely knocked out Shoto, didn't he? I want you to spar with me, Endeavor. Shoto and even Burnin aren't strong enough. I want to surpass both of them, and I can only do that by fighting someone as strong as you. Izuku got in a fighting stance, ready for anything the pro hero would do, though Endeavor simply smiled and then chuckled. Shoto will surpass you. He's just being rebellious and not taking the advice I gave him. As for your request, fine. Endeavor would quickly rush Izuku and punch him in the gut. Even with Izuku's Sharingan activated, he couldn't react to Endeavor's speed. He was right. This pro hero was on a whole nother level. The Uchiha would fall to the ground, unconscious from only one attack. Endeavor would then walk over to Shoto and pick him up, taking him to a different room, trying to come up with a plan to make his son faster. This Uchiha kid was still stronger and faster than his son, and that just wouldn't do. He had to make Shoto better. His son would be made into the #1 hero, if it's the last thing Endeavor did. Izuku would wake up an hour or two later, his stomach still aching from the hit he took earlier. So that was how fast a real pro was. It was brief, and Endeavor was so fast that Izuku's eyes weren't able to copy it. Endeavor was cruel, almost villainous, a person just like Izuku's own father, or that's at least how he thought his father would be. Now the Uchiha knew just what Todoroki had been going through all this time. So, even the #2 hero was scum. Maybe heroes really were the bad guys. Either way, Izuku was at his limit now. He'd have to get stronger in order to copy Endeavor's speed, but the only person he could think to copy was a villain. The hero killer, Stain. Izuku would change into his hero costume and join Burnin out in the field, patrolling with her while secretly looking for Stain. While Izuku did join Endeavor's agency to learn from him, he had also joined because it was near Hosu City, right where Stain was operating. If Plan A had failed, Izuku just needed to succeed with Plan B. Now, as all this was going down, everything would be going pretty similar to how it did in the anime, though there are some slight differences, especially with Bakugo and Best Jeanist. While Bakugo is still pretty stubborn, he's much more responsive with the pro. The bombastic blonde had lost to Izuku once again, and now was desperate to get stronger. Bakugo would do mostly everything Jeanist said for about half the week, which is when he failed to see how acting better and having combed hair would make him stronger. At that point, he'd go back to how Bakugo was in the anime, if not a little worse. Oh, and there's also the Stain meeting with Shigaraki. So there's a bit of a problem here. Shigaraki still has his Nomu. One of the strongest Nomu to ever exist is with Shigaraki when he meets Stain. What does this mean? Well, nothing at first. The hero killer was fast enough to speed blitz both Shigaraki and Kurogiri, and while Nomu's far faster, he'd still get paralyzed by Stain due to him trying to shield Shigaraki. This does, however, give the villain enough time to analyze Stain and figure out how his quirk worked. Shigaraki still gets paralyzed a few seconds later, and things end up going just as they did in the anime, ending in a standoff with both parties disliking each other. The one difference here is that Shigaraki realizes just how strong Stain is, and that he'll need two things if he wants to show him up. He needs to get as many Nomu as possible, and now he wants a Nomu that could actually think for himself. See, while he loved the USJ Nomu because it was strong and could regenerate, He also recognized, especially from this fight, that a Nomu that could actually think would be far superior. And we leave the villains off with Shigaraki asking his master for just that, a Nomu that could think for itself. Hours later, Izuku, Ida, and Todoroki are patrolling the streets with their respective hero guardians. Endeavor is trying very hard to catch villains here, attempting to show his son just how fast a pro hero has to be in order to resolve incidents. Izuku is using his eyes sparingly and frequently checking alleys where he can. Ida is doing the same as Izuku, attempting to find Stain and get his revenge for his brother. Once Stain begins his fight with Native, Shigaraki releases the fodder Nomu on the city, having all three of them close together, eagerly waiting for the pro heroes to arrive. This time, Shigaraki has a slightly better plan, if not a little more reckless, due to him still being, a bit of a man-child. While Shigaraki couldn't get a Nomu that could think for itself, he still has the USJ Nomu, and he's waiting for just the right time to unleash it. Like in the anime, all of the Hosu City heroes end up responding to the attack, with Ida noticing Stain in an alleyway. Izuku and Burnin end up coming into contact with Endeavor and Shoto, the two students exchanging a quick rivalry glance. While everyone is busy dealing with the Nomu, Izuku overhears Manuel yelling Ida's name, and like in the anime, he quickly realizes what most likely happened. Izuku, like in the anime, is told to get away from the fight, and he does just that, running off to find Ida. And really, Izuku is pretty lucky because as soon as he finds Ida and Stain, Shigaraki unleashes the USJ Nomu onto the heroes. Manuel, sadly, is the first to be attacked, taking a huge punch from Nomu, one that instantly knocks him out. This causes Endeavor and all the other pros to turn their attention to the USJ Nomu, which means Endeavor doesn't get to fully kill the Absorption Nomu. For simplicity's sake, we'll be referring to the Absorption Nomu as Boo, the Regeneration Nomu is Adesu, and the Flying Nomu is Bat. Oh, and the USJ Nomu? We're naming him Tori. Back in the alleyway, Izuku would walk in on the scene of Stain about to kill Ida, with the villain berating the student, telling him he wasn't a true hero. The Uchiha would instantly activate a Sharingan, before charging the villain and kicking him away from Ida. As Stain flew away, Izuku would quickly attempt to close the distance between the two, all while Ida pleaded for him to leave and not protect him. This caused Izuku to stop in his tracks and look back at his friend. "It's true. I don't want you to die, Ida, but I'm also here to fight Stain myself. I need to fight someone this strong in order to become stronger." This completely shocked Ida. He knew Izuku wasn't the most heroic person in class, but he definitely thought the Uchiha was here to save him.
"So, you're only here to fight me, not to save your friend? Your obsession with strength is disgusting. A true hero would be more interested in saving the two people who are injured."
This made Izuku smirk as he took a fighting stance.
"You can't be a hero if you're not stronger or smarter than the villains you have to fight. Call me a fake hero all you want. My only option would be to fight you either way."
Stain would have to agree at this point, though he'd say that if they fight, the weaker of the two would be cold. Izuku would be fine with this, and wouldn't send out his location since he didn't want any help with this villain. The Uchiha wants to win this fight by himself, wants to push himself to the brink so that he can improve. He knew this villain was a whole different breed from the ones at USJ, and it sort of excited him. The two would charge each other, with Stain throwing a couple of knives at Izuku, who copied the moveset and caught the knives, throwing them right back at the attacker. Stain would dodge this and attempt to swing his sword at Izuku, who quickly slid under the villain. Stain used his offhand to slash behind himself, only for the Uchiha to block the attack and counter with a series of punches to Stain's chest and face. The punches didn't hurt Stain much, but it did keep him from effectively moving, which is just what Izuku wanted. The Uchiha was keeping Stain from using any of his weapons, thus diminishing his chances of getting cut. Izuku finished the combo by uppercutting Stain before dropping down to the ground and kicking him up into the air. Unlike with Shoto though, Stain was able to tank most of the damage and spun in the air, attempting to kick Izuku with his spiked boots. This surprised the Uchiha, who quickly leapt back, noticing the nearby two throwing knives that Stain had dodged earlier. Stain would land on the ground and draw his sword once more.
That was impressive, but you're not strong enough to knock me out, and if all you can do is that, you're going to die right here in this alleyway.
Ida would plead for Izuku to run away, saying that he needed to defeat Stain himself. Izuku shouldn't have to die here. Ida needed to get this revenge. He needed to get it for his older brother. Izuku looked past Stain and to Ida.
Come on, is that any way to talk when you took your brother's name? What would he think if he heard that?
This shocked Ida. What was he saying? His older brother would never want revenge like this. He would never go to these lengths to get revenge either. Stain would sheath his sword before rushing at Izuku, throwing more knives at the student. Izuku would go to grab the knives, only to notice that Stain had somehow gotten faster. The Uchiha would grab one of the knives and quickly block an incoming slash from Stain. The force of the blow was enough to push Izuku back a bit, causing him to disengage and leap back to make some more distance between the two. Not only had the villain gone a little faster, he was also a little stronger than before. Did he have some sort of enhancer type quirk? No. His quirk was responsible for paralyzing Ida. What was more likely here is that Stain was holding back before, and now he was loosening up. The speed wasn't too bad. Izuku's Sharingan could keep up, but just barely. This was getting dangerous, more so than Izuku liked. He might even have to use... No, he couldn't resort to Genjutsu. Not again. The villain would once again charge Izuku, though the Uchiha didn't panic. He stayed as calm as possible and attempted to read his opponent's movements. It was true that Stain had gone faster, but Izuku's eyes were also slowly improving. The hero killer threw his sword up into the air before grabbing a knife to swing at Izuku. Normally this would work on someone, but Izuku, with his Sharingan, could read the situation almost perfectly. Izuku would jump into the air and grab Stain's sword, slashing down at the villain. Stain was able to sidestep the sword before driving his knife up towards Izuku's stomach. The Uchiha would quickly drop the sword and grab onto his opponent's arm and spin in the air, kicking Stain in the process. The villain would go to grab another knife so he could stab Izuku, only for the Uchiha to grab it first and land behind him. Stain would jump away, anticipating Izuku would try to stab him, only to turn around and see the knife flying right at his face. Stain ducked under the knife, only to watch Izuku kick the sword on the ground towards him. As Stain thought about what to do, Izuku did so as well. It's not that he didn't have a plan, it was simply a question of whether he should go through with it or not. Was Izuku okay with the results of what he would do? Was he fine with taking a possible different path than the one he originally planned out? Would this make him stronger in the end? No, he couldn't go through with it. Not yet, at least. As Stain jumped into the air, Izuku threw a knife he had saved from earlier, the blade digging into the villain's shoulder. Stain would growl in pain before landing on the ground, sliding several feet away from Izuku. The Uchiha was panting, but wasn't injured at all, with the opposite being the case for Stain. Izuku had to go as fast as he could just to keep up with the villain, and only ended up taking out one of his arms. Maybe he really should have aimed for the head. Stain pulled the knife out of his arm and began running at Izuku. The Uchiha's eyes had become adjusted to Stain's speed, but his body hadn't, and it would be difficult to keep fighting at such speeds. He couldn't beat this villain by himself. How pathetic. Stain would rush forward and slash at Izuku, who couldn't dodge it perfectly, the blade putting a small cut on his cheek. It was small, but it was enough for Stain to draw blood, and the villain happily licked his blade, which caused Izuku to fall to the ground, paralyzed. The villain would normally finish Izuku off, but he needed to kill Ida and Native before they recovered. Stain dropped the knife he used to cut Izuku and grabbed his sword, walking over to Ida and standing over him. Izuku watched on as Stain held the sword over Ida, preparing to drive it into his chest.
Now, to make you an offering to a better world.
Stain lurched forward, his sword flying out of his hand and onto the ground next to Ida. The engine hero looked up, seeing Izuku standing behind Stain and holding a knife inside his shoulder. But how? Didn't Stain paralyze him earlier?
How did you...
My quirk. It allows me to cast small illusions on people. I tricked you into thinking you cut me and licked my blood. It was all just an illusion. The truth is, Izuku did get cut, but he changed the location of where the blood was on the knife, making Stain lick the bare metal. It was a risky plan, but it was all Izuku could think of in the moment. I couldn't beat you myself, so I had to resort to using illusions and using your own weapons. You should leave now that you're so injured, unless you want to get captured. Ida and Native would look at Izuku like he was some sort of madman. Why the hell would he let a villain go? Unless maybe he couldn't beat him now? Maybe he was too tired, or maybe he just was running out of time to use his eyes? Stain would smile slightly, knowing exactly what Ida was thinking.
You're too tired to keep fighting. Well, I'm not!
Stain would turn around and go to kick Izuku with his spiked boots. The Uchiha would take the knife out of Stain's shoulder and drive it into his shin, right below his knee pad, and kick him away. Stain would land on the ground hard and slide out into the street, right where a wide-eyed Todoroki was standing. The student would look from Stain to Izuku, then back to the villain. Did Izuku beat this guy all on his own? After getting over the initial shock, Todoroki would quickly go to capture the villain, only for Bat to fly by and pick up Stain. This surprised everyone, but Izuku was the most shocked. He had gone through all that work to not kill Stain, only to have him taken away like that? Damn it! The three in the alleyway would run out to see just how much damage the Nomu squad had done. Behind Todoroki, the city was in flames, with clouds of smoke pouring out. Izuku scanned the city, trying to find any trace of Bat, but the Nomu had escaped. Perhaps it went where all the other Nomu were, deeper into the city. Izuku, under the guise of trying to save people, would tell Native and Ida that they needed to go into the city and help out the other heroes. But Todoroki would stop the heroes in their tracks, telling the trio what had happened with the Nomu fight. The four Nomu had caused a ton of damage, with Tori, the USJ Nomu, giving Endeavor a great fight. Since there were so many heroes knocked unconscious, Endeavor couldn't use his special moves as well, and thus couldn't completely kill Tori. The other Nomu were able to beat up several pros, with Todoroki trying to hold off Four-Eyed Nomu that kept absorbing his ice and fire. The other Nomu would also distract Endeavor, making him unable to properly focus on Tori. At that point, Shigaraki arrived and started spouting stuff about how Hero Society was bad and that this is what the pros deserved for being the government's enforcers. So, basically the same fake speech that he made at USJ. It was pretty hopeless, all until some small flying hero and tall blonde guy called Lemillion arrived. Once they got on the battlefield and started aiding Endeavor, Shigaraki and his lackeys quickly retreated, though Lemillion and Endeavor were able to capture two Nomu, and greatly injure another. After the fight, Todoroki remembered that Izuku had run off and that Ida had also been missing, so he decided to run off to find them. Izuku was interested in these two heroes who were apparently on or near Endeavor's level, and so he asked Todoroki to lead him to these heroes. There was something he needed to tell them. In another city, however, Shigaraki was sitting in his hideout, happy to have had a successful mission, even though he did lose to Nomu. Tori had also gone very injured, with his arm being burnt off and unable to heal due to Endeavor figuring out how to cauterize the wounds. Bat was mostly unscathed, and had even been able to capture Stain without any problems. The mission went perfectly. Now there was no way Stain could possibly show him up. That guy tried to be all high and mighty about killing people, and Shigaraki had already done that at USJ, so this time he just said it all in front of a camera for everyone to hear. But then that damn hero showed up, punching Shigaraki in the face and yelling power. At least Kurogiri was able to warp them all out of there without any problems, and Shigaraki woke up about 30 or so minutes after he got knocked out. And now, the villain could possibly have an even better Nomu than Tori. "Master," Shigaraki said, looking over at the screen within his hideout. "You said if I could capture a strong hero, you'd make them into a Nomu that could think. Well, how about a strong villain? Do you think you can make him into one?" Shigaraki looked back at Stain, who was laying on the floor, unconscious due to his blood loss.
"I think we can make do with this. I'll make him into such a Nobu. All for you, Shigaraki Tomura."
But that is where we'll be leaving it off for now, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I ask that you throw a knife at that like button, and maybe even combo attack that subscribe button. Have a good one wherever you are. That's it for now. Bye bye!